On the 19th of November 1948, inside the walls of Landsberg Prison, there was a terrifying and brutal concentration camp guard who worked at many different camps who was led towards the gallows. He was helped up the steps of the execution platform, and waiting for him was the American executioner with the noose firmly in his grasp. Adam Ankenbrand saw action at some of the most brutal camps of the Second World War, and he was someone who was accused of being an executioner as well as a torturer, and it was claimed that he himself shot a number of prisoners who were suffering to a huge extent. There were a number of serious incidents involving Ankenbrand at the end of the war, as Heinrich Himmler had ordered the evacuations of prisoners to different camps. Before his actions he was sentenced to death, and behind the thick moustache was a sadist and ruthless Nazi war criminal. Welcome to The Untold Past. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Adam Ankenbrand was born on the 10th of November 1887 inside of Hamburg. He was an unskilled worker, and he did do a number of different jobs until the First World War broke out, and he was then drafted to serve inside the German army. Ankenbrand was sent to the front lines, and he was then wounded twice, and he even inside the trenches contracted typhus, which caused him a significant amount of pain and suffering. However, following the defeat of the First World War, it's not known what line of work he went into, but he was a member of the Nazi Party, and like so many people he supported Adolf Hitler and his political party, who promised to restore German pride following the defeat of the First World War. Germany were forced to accept the blame for the First World War and causing it, and this led to a lot of tension in the nation, coupled with the other Treaty of Versailles terms, such as a restriction of the army to 100,000 soldiers. Ankenbrand went further, and he joined the SS, Heinrich Himmler's paramilitary group, and Himmler had asked for many Aryan men to join, as he wanted to build up his numbers. It was clear that this was for one day creating a feared fighting force, and the SS would become some of the most ardent and virulent soldiers of the Second World War, but they also became the guards of the concentration camps, and the group had the blood of millions of people on their hands as the Second World War would break out. Ankenbrand served as a member of the German army and the Wehrmacht, and during the Second World War he was a non-commissioned officer, and he did have a significant amount of experience. He fought in a number of different battles, but then against his will, as the war had turned against the Germans, he was in June 1944 transferred to become a member of the guard staff inside of Mauthausen. He served here as a guard, and Mauthausen was known for its terrible conditions. It was one of the most serious and ruthless camps. Mauthausen was built around the site of a quarry, and the stone here was to be used in Hitler's huge building projects, and the prisoners were to be exterminated through labour. At the site there was the Stairs of Death. This was a set of 186 stone steps that were uneven, and prisoners were forced to march up these many times a day, carrying stones which were up to 50 kilograms in weight. It was terrifying work, and SS guards drove these inmates up and down, and they also carried out terrifying executions as they forced prisoners to shove others off the cliff face in sadistic games. There was also a huge amount of disease and death that spread around the site. But Ankenbrand, after working here, was then sent across to the Buchenwald concentration camp, another terrifying site of torture and execution. Buchenwald was very tough, and the conditions here were also shocking. There was a huge amount of execution carried out at the site, as SS guards and executioners shot prisoners inside the neck shooting facilities in the camp, and over 280,000 people passed through the barbed wire fences of the camp. The final camp that Ankenbrand served inside of was the Schlieben subcamp. It was a place where many prisoners died from malnutrition, sickness and beatings at the hands of the guards, and the prisoners were ordered to dig tunnels for an underground ammunitions factory, and at this camp the conditions were awful. But during his work here, and in the latter days of the war, Ankenbrand got involved in executions. He, during one incident at the camp, was in charge of a guard detail, and the prisoners, one evening in September 1944, were rocked by an explosion in the factory. The prisoners were ordered to gather in a field, and they were then lying down. Ankenbrand then personally shot and wounded one of them. But then he shot and killed another prisoner who was also lying down. Further horror was carried out, as then in April 1945, he was during an evacuation of the subcamp to Theresienstadt, accompanying prisoners. During this transport, one of the inmates left the train to search for food, and Ankenbrand with no hesitation shot and killed this prisoner. On this transport it was also known that there were many bodies on the train, of those people who had died from starvation. The transport rested, and Ankenbrand ordered 20 prisoners to bury the bodies of those who had died, and they did this in a nearby forest. But whilst they were burying the deceased, 5 prisoners walked off to pick grass to eat as they were so desperate, but Adam Ankenbrand then pulled out his weapon, and he shot all 5 of these men. He already had a bad reputation for cruelty and brutality within the camps, but here he was murdering prisoners of war in the final days of the Second World War. At the end of the conflict he was seized, and was then brought to a courtroom during one of the Dachau trials. Adam Ankenbrand was accused of having committed war crimes and Nazi crimes against prisoners inside the concentration camps. He was accused of having shot those who escaped when the munitions factory exploded, and also in having shot those prisoners who left the train, as witnesses documented the horror of his crimes. He underwent a psychological evaluation as part of the charges that he faced, and it was found in this that he was a neurotic man and someone who worried a lot. However, he was capable of distinguishing between right and wrong, and that he knew his actions were wrong and that he carried them out willingly. For his crimes, Adam Ankenbrand was sentenced to death, and he was found guilty of all counts that he was accused of. He was then sent to Landsberg Prison to await his death sentence. Landsberg was a site where hundreds of Nazi war criminals were locked up inside of at the end of the war, and it was overseen by American authorities in post-war Germany. It was here where the gallows regularly were used to condemn those who were sentenced to death following post-war trials. Ankenbrand was on death row for some time, and a significant appeal did go in to the American authorities to gain clemency and a release from his death sentence that would save his life, but this did not succeed, and it was said that his death sentence should then be carried out. The decision was made based on a number of major evidences that were stacked up against him. On the 19th of November 1948, Adam Ankenbrand was led out of his prison cell by many American military policemen. Also part of the entourage during the procession of the dead was a priest, who was there to give over spiritual guidance in his final moments, and the priest was also instructed to hear Ankenbrand's final words. The execution party reached the foot of the scaffold in the courtyard, and the condemned's identity was then confirmed as he was helped up the steps of the gallows. He was then given over to the executioner, who worked quickly. A photographer took a final image of him, and he then placed a black cap over his head, followed by the noose. The noose was tightened around the neck of Adam Ankenbrand, and he was then placed over the trapdoor. After a few final checks were made, the executioner released the trapdoor, and Ankenbrand plunged through the gallows structure to his death. His remains were then placed inside of a coffin. Adam Ankenbrand was a German man who had a long history within the German military. He had served during the First World War and had been a soldier during the Second World War, but against his wishes he was taken from the battlefields to then go and serve inside the concentration camps. This could have been for a number of reasons, including his age, as he was one of the more senior soldiers fighting for the Wehrmacht, and it may have been judged that he had a better role inside of Hitler's Germany, working inside the concentration camps. But he was known for being a brutal and ruthless guard, and he was someone who executed and murdered many prisoners in the final months of the Second World War. For this he was sentenced to death and was executed on the same gallows as many other Nazi war criminals were. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.